which will appear momentarily. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me here today. I'm genuinely so excited to be in Armenia. This is my very first time here, and I'm actually a quarter Armenian. My father's dad, so I guess my grandfather that I never met, was Armenian. So I've been so lucky to travel around the past couple days and see a little bit of your beautiful country, and I feel more Armenian than ever. All right, so this is my slides. All right, this is me with some of my very first toys, which were some voltmeters, some multimeters, very safe. And yes, some of my other very first toys were a box of transistors and other electronic parts. I grew up on Vancouver Island, which is in British Columbia, Canada, so it's on the west coast. My father had immigrated from Poland, and my mother comes from the Philippines. I'm 24 years old, and yes, my name is Ann. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. So I wasn't given many conventional toys, so instead what I would do is I would take my hot glue gun and garbage from around the house and piece together my very first inventions, which of course never worked, but the idea of taking the resources around me and piecing them together to make something better, or in my situation, just to improve my boredom as a child, kind of started coming naturally. I have a little video that I hope will work that I wanted to show you of some of my very early, slightly non-functional inventions. Okay, I think someone might need to press play on the video. I'll give it a second. Okay, if the video is not going to work, I will just narrate. Basically, it's me showing this, which is basically a bunch of wood and wires and old cereal boxes that I had glued together. I had a whole table of inventions behind me, so it was very much one of my favorite pastimes. And then from there, you know, I wasn't given a dollhouse, so I would just make my own out of cardboard and whatever garbage. I had a Barbie, and my dad threw it out immediately, so I just used plastic animals usually. And I grew up also learning how to solder. I think I'm around 9 or 10 years old there. I was just a very weird kid. I mean, I did not fit in at school at all, so don't worry if you don't either. And I also was really big into film archival and learning how to take care of old celluloid film. I was raised on silent films from the 1920s. Basically, everyone thought it was extremely weird. And here's me collecting bugs, which was my favorite toy because they were free and in the backyard. So as far as I was concerned, that was a bargain. So I joined my very first science fair when I was in grade 6. I was around 10 or 11 years old, just on my local science fair. Have any of you guys done a science fair project before? A few hands, lovely. All right, so basically you get to work on a question that you have or a problem that you see. I was doing it outside of school, and then you make a hypothesis, you make probably a prototype, or you do some experiments, you come to a conclusion, etc. So this was me at my very first one. I basically looked like Harry Potter. It was a great time in my life. And from there, I ended up doing 10 science fairs before I don't know why one picture is missing, before I graduated high school. And all of my inventions were in the area of alternative energy harvesting, which means harvesting energy that's always around us, but we don't necessarily take advantage of yet regularly all the time. So a great example of this is solar cells, even though they are becoming more commonly implemented. I also was interested in piezoelectric discs. Does anybody know what that is? So basically, they're these piezoelectric crystals, and they're on these flat little discs, and when you put a little bit of pressure or vibrate them, they actually produce a very small amount of electric charge. So I was using that to harvest kinetic energy, and I also became interested in harvesting the thermoelectric energy, which I'll get into a little later. All right, so I'm half Filipino. I have a bunch of friends in the Philippines, and one day one of them had wrote to me that she had failed her grade in school because she had no electricity. So her family couldn't afford to pay the bills, so when she came home, she had no light to study with at night. And that really shocked me that someone else around the world who I thought was just like me didn't have something as simple as light, which I completely took for granted every time I just went home and flicked on the light switch. So I decided to base my next science fair project around her problem and see if I could create a light source that wouldn't require any batteries. So I actually ended up first making a piezoelectric flashlight, which harnessed the kinetic energy of humans. Basically, I had a bunch of these discs, and I put them around a gear and a crank, and I hit all of them at once, and it was very noisy, but it produced quite a lot of light. And then because I thought that was too tedious, for my next year I decided to harvest the thermal energy of humans. So we're actually 100-watt walking light bulbs. We radiate so much energy every day in the form of heat, and it's all getting wasted. So I thought, why not try to capture just a little bit of it? All right, so this is the thermoelectric effect. Very simply, I used these white Peltier tiles, which you can just buy anywhere on Amazon or eBay. And there's tiny dissimilar metals and many, many junctions of them, usually bismuth and telluride are the metals being used inside these tiles. And when I heat one side of the tile and I cool the other, I get a very small amount of electricity. So what I decided to do was heat one side with the palm of my hand and cool the other side with a hollow aluminum tube, which would allow for maximum air convection currents to flow through and around the tube and cool it even further. So I did that, and it didn't work. Basically, I wasn't getting enough energy to light the LED, so I had to go through a bunch of different experiments and circuits. It took me months, but I eventually was able to get it. These are my very first prototypes of the flashlight that I made when I was 15, and basically it's like literally like plastic piping from a local store, craft foam to wrap around the flashlight body, an aluminum tube, 4 tiny Peltier tiles there, and then I had 2 bigger ones here, and then a very simple circuit and the LEDs. So that was my science fair project. I went to the local science fair, then I went to the Canada-wide science fair, and then I ended up going to the Google Science Fair at the start of my grade 11 year, so I was 15, and that ended up totally changing my life. Then I also invented the e-drink my next year of high school, which is a coffee mug that harvests the excess heat of your hot drink and converts it into electricity. So eventually, if you drink a lot of coffee, you could give your phone a boost of energy. And this came out of my classmates' problems of their phones always running out of battery and that their coffee was taking too long to cool down. And since then, I've gotten to do many cool things that I'm very excited about and feel very lucky that I've gotten to do. Truly did not expect any of this to happen. I was just happy making my little inventions at home and competing in science fairs. Science fair is very interesting because it's actually a combination of science and art skills, even though it's called science fair. Yes, you are doing the experimenting and inventions and prototyping and all of that, but then you have to write a whole paper on your project, you have to make a poster board that's understandable and visually pleasing, and you have to be able to present your project to a little kid that's wandering by who's 6 years old, or a professor who's an expert in the field. So I learned quite a lot of skills from science fair, so I highly encourage any of you guys to try and join any local science competitions. The past 2 years, I also worked on a line of children's toys that run off of green energy. Sadly, I had to let go of the line, but I just wanted to show some of the early prototype drawings. This one was just a simple way for very young kids to understand alternative energy sources. So I made a brain that you would wind up. You could see through the body for all the gears and how it would work. Then I did basically I took my patented technology that I used in the flashlight with the Peltier tiles, and then when you put your hand on the tiles, the eyes of the bunny would light up, and all the parts were interchangeable, and so you could make different, slightly grotesque animals that way. And then I also did Otis Carbuncle, which was a turtle that you would put under the sun, and because of the solar cells, it would start singing. But then when you took it out of the sun, it would stop, because that's how solar cell technology usually works when it doesn't have batteries inside of it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my passion, which is the combination of science and art. I truly believe that the best inventions, the best ideas come from when we have multiple talents and interests in both science and art, not just science. So I believe in STEAM, I guess, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And so much, like I said, my science fair experience was a combination of science and art skills, even though I didn't think of that at the time, like that it was like that. And for example, if you look at your phones or your tablets, it's a great example of, yes, the science and tech is there for the interface to work great, but also it's very aesthetically pleasing. We don't carry around clunky brick phones from like the 1980s or 90s. I wasn't alive, but I assume that's what they were like. So don't discount any interests or passions you have in the arts, because honestly, it can give you a very interesting and diverse perspective when you come into tech or come into STEAM in a way that other people may not have. I just wanted to give a couple other tips when it comes to inventing. So I want you to be open to inspiration. It can arrive at any time. I always have a little notebook and pen in my purse. I don't usually use my notes app on my phone because, let's be real, we never actually look at our notes once we've written them down on our phone. I sleep beside a notebook as well, and I come up with ideas. Usually, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but the idea when the time when you're drifting off to sleep, but you're not quite asleep, you can get these kind of crazy ideas that come into your mind. So I always try and write those down. I think as adults, sometimes we start shutting down creative ideas that we have quite quickly. We're like, oh, well, I have no idea how to do that, or that's not realistic, or I don't have the time or resources to do that. But I think it's really important that we retain a little bit of that childlike curiosity and openness when it comes to ideas. Because when we're kids and we're like, okay, let's play, pirates, immediately you become the pirate. And so when you get ideas as an adult, don't be afraid to don't shut them down straight away. Be like, okay, let me go with that for a few minutes. Let me see what that could look like. Because you never know what kind of ideas you would get. Also, I think it's really important to give your brain time to be bored. Nowadays, when we're in line, waiting for coffee, things like that, we immediately go on our phones. We're not allowing any time for our brain to slightly wander off. And that's sometimes when ideas that have been percolating at the back of your head can really pop forward. So put away your phone for a little bit, or I honestly get my best ideas, this is absolutely horrific of me to say, when I'm at school and I'm at a lecture, or sometimes when I'm at a party and I'm truly not engaged, my mind will wander and I will come up with great ideas. So find the best space for you to be creative and follow that. Okay, nobody will know who this is unless you're born before 1980. This is one of my favorite actors, Richard Chamberlain, who is in this great TV miniseries called The Thornbirds that you should all watch. And I was reading his autobiography, and he actually had this great quote, which is, "Where do ideas come from? Preceding any creation or discovery is attention. It is giving our attention that opens the peepholes and great doors of discovery." So you really need to think about who and what you're giving your attention to, because that is also your time, which is the most precious resource, in my opinion, that you have in your life. So you're an average of the 5 people you spend the most time around. So who are those people? Are they also encouraging of whatever your passions may be? Are they also working on things that they're excited about? You want to surround yourself with constructive people that are creative, inspiring, and open-minded. This is something I learned. I lived in New York for the past 3 years, and I grew up as a Canadian girl, so very polite, never outspoken, and something that I had to learn the hard way that I want to tell you guys now is just ask for things. Like, never be afraid to ask, because you never know what you're going to get. And a lot of times, people will see a younger version of themselves in you, and they're going to want to give you advice or going to want to help you. So don't be afraid to speak up. Put up your hand, ask a question, reach out on LinkedIn, whatever it may be, but don't be afraid to ask for help. This is something that I've struggled with personally a lot over the past few years, which is just accepting myself as I am. I think we often, as women, especially in society, feel this need to fit in a certain way or come across a certain way. And I spent a lot of time in my teens figuring out just like who I was and, not putting on an air of who I thought I should be or to be polite or any of these things. So I think it's the faster you can just not care what people think and just be yourself, the faster you will be to A, finding out what you really want to do, and B, being the most genuine version of yourself and living that most genuine version of your life. So please do not worry what people think. Honestly, people are so worried at the end of the day how they're coming across that they're probably not even thinking about you as much as you think they are. So just be unabashedly yourself. And I think that is the best way to be a rebellious young woman in science or art or whatever area you love. Just pursue it. Don't care what people think. I think I received personally a lot of pressure from my family to be an engineer and do all these things, and I ran right off in the opposite direction, wanting to do instead both science and art instead of just science, because I realized at the end of the day that if I just did science, it wouldn't be genuine to who I was. So all of you guys really need to take time to reflect, what is genuine to you? What do you want to pursue? And if you didn't have any outside influences, what secret deep in your heart do you want to pursue? Because sometimes actually if you look back to what you dreamed about being as a kid, as a little girl, that can still be the thing that you really want to do as an adult. So don't discount that either. Finally, I'm going to end with this quote, which is, creativity isn't a luxury, but a necessity. It's a means of survival. And I know sometimes people don't think of themselves as quote-unquote creative people, but we all innately possess creativity. It's just sometimes in the educational system or the way we grow up, we're not trained to use that creativity, that creative muscle properly. So make sure you spend a little bit of time every day trying to reconsole perhaps your relationship with creativity. Treat it as a friend, as your sister, as the other half of yourself that comes out to play when you get those cool ideas from your imagination. Yes, so, and also I suggest sometimes if you look back, maybe you loved, I don't know, tap dancing when you were at the age of 5, or you loved swimming lessons, or maybe you were really into coding at age 9, but now at age 17 you're not. I really encourage you to go back, look back in your life at previous hobbies or interests you had, and try them again. Because sometimes really miraculous discoveries about yourself or ideas will come to the forefront when you explore all facets of yourself, both in the sciences and the arts. Anyways, thank you guys so much for having me here today. You can follow me on social media if you want, but I appreciate your time.